Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're standing in a warm little shop where the windows fog softly and the air tastes like butter and cinnamon, where trays glint under sleepy lights and a mixer sighs between turns. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And in the comments, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I like seeing our little constellation of night owls. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe let a fan hum in the background. And let's begin tonight's journey together. I am Nora. And on my opening morning, I set 5 croissant rows as neatly as fence posts and wrote the word open with chalk that squeaked like it had stage fright. Buttered sunlight slid across the tile. The bell above the door did its first shy ring. I had saved for 12 years by baking late, brownies cooling beside the electric bill. Macarons lined up like tiny helmets for hope. The lease was small, the menu smaller, and my faith, on that first day, was exactly the right size, just enough to stand up. At 10 o'clock, my daughter Lila arrived with Brandon in a dress the color of a good strawberry, holding a phone already angled for judgment. "Well," she said, sweeping the room with the speed of a price check. "It's quaint?" Brandon poked a baguette with a single finger as if it might confess. "Nora," he said, using my name like he'd found it on a receipt. "We talked about your, retirement. We're worried. This looks like a midlife hobby." Lila placed her phone near the till and announced, "This is my mother's bakery. She reinvented herself after failing at basically everything else." She smiled at the camera. "We're rooting for you, Mom, but, do you have a business plan?" I had one, printed and clipped, the kind that believes in ovens and rent. But shame is loud when it's in your family's mouth. You can hear it with the mixers off. "Would you like coffee?" I asked. "Because hospitality is a fence I can always build." "Oat milk," Lila said. "Half pump vanilla, 2 pumps achievement." She laughed at her own joke, and I almost did, too, because it landed like confetti in the wrong room. Brandon took a selfie with the case and said, "For my followers, support small businesses, but responsibly." 2 customers came in on the breeze and saved me with their appetites. I boxed a lemon tart that tasted like sunlight, took notes. My hands remembered more than my heart did. Fold, turn, rest, pipe, tap, breathe. Elder wisdom. When someone calls you a failure, hand them a plate or a boundary. Both are forms of portion control, and either one keeps you from feeding their appetite for your pain. Sales were slow enough that the register had time to think. Every ring felt like a blessing with ankles. Lila filmed the empty lull and added a filter that made the walls cooler, the trays lonelier. "It's just sad," she said, not whispering, as if sad were a neutral color. Brandon asked the question that always wears a smirk. "So, how long can you do this before? The math?" I wiped the counter with the calm of someone who only cries where butter can't hear. "Long enough," I said. "And after that, I'll bake again tomorrow." Academic phrase of the day, survivorship bias. The public argument that we notice the bakeries that thrive because they're visible and ignore the many that closed quietly. It tricks us into thinking success is guaranteed if we copy the visible survivors. The antidote is measuring your own numbers instead of someone else's highlight reel. By noon, my feet had become weather forecasters. Ache meant rain was thinking about it. A delivery driver brought flour and the news that the ice machine was already making small opinions about life. I laughed, light joke one, because the machine sounded like it was chewing its own memoir. I portioned cookie dough into neat scoops that looked like moons with plans. A little boy pressed his face to the glass and left behind a perfect oval of breath. I filled a bag for him and wrote bravery tax paid on the receipt, which made his mother tear up in a way that didn't need words. Lila returned at 3 with a friend who wore discernment like jewelry. "We're doing a series," she said. "Women who try." I made more coffee than the situation deserved and set it down like a peace flag no one would salute. "Mom," Lila added, "I love you, but this is delusional. You're the failure of the family if you throw your savings into flaky dough and vibes." Brandon snorted, then tried a free sample so aggressively it counted as a sport. I wanted to say many intelligent things. Instead, I adjusted the oven temp and told the room to stay kind inside my hearing. Quirky fact. Sidebar. Croissants are laminated dough, thin layers of butter and dough folded again and again in France. It's illegal to call it butter croissant unless the fat is 100% butter, no substitutes. The science is pure geometry and patience. Steam lifts the layers like 1,000 tiny stand-ups rehearsing in an oven. The afternoon drooped. A couple canceled a cake order with a cheerful email that began, "So sorry," and ended with, "We'll circle back." A phrase that means never unless gravity changes. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't know. "Is this Nora's bakery?" a brisk voice asked. "Camille Penn, event planner. I need a dessert table for this Saturday. Blackstone Estate. 60 guests. Gold standard everything. My pâtissier broke his wrist. Can you handle flavor plus elegance under insomnia conditions?" I looked at my calendar, which resembled a polite meadow. "Yes," I said, before fear could negotiate. "Send me your must-haves and your no's. I'll draft a menu in an hour, after the call." I sat on the stool that squeaks in its own key and let the relief be small and sufficient. Light joke, too. I told the mixer we were going to prom. It agreed by refusing to wobble. I sketched a plan. Pâte à choux towers with spun sugar. Dark chocolate tarts glossed like night pawns. Citrus meringue kisses that dissolve like applause you can eat. I priced the ingredients to the gram and the labor to the hour. Sometimes dignity is a spreadsheet with unblinking eyes. Around 5, Lila walked back in, as if pulled by narrative. "Wait, the Blackstone Estate?" she said, suddenly attentive. "As in Victor Langley's place?" Brandon whistled the way a kettle threatens. "Billionaire birthday circuit," he said. "They'll want signature flavors and people who don't sweat." I did sweat. I also smiled. "They'll get clean lines and butter that minds its manners," I answered. "And if they don't like that, they'll get a refund and an extra loaf for the ride home." Lila's expression shifted. Not soft, but less sharp. "Don't mess this up," she said. And for a second, I heard care hiding under her performance like a napkin under silverware. "I won't," I said, "because I'll prepare, not perform." Then I put her to work. "Hold this piping bag," I said. "Steady pressure. Breathe like you're telling the truth." She rolled her eyes, then steadied her hand. "A dozen shells later," she said, "half to me, half to the meringue." "This is harder than you make it look." "Most things are," I answered. And we let the oven finish a conversation we didn't know how to have. Before closing, I set out tomorrow's butter to soften properly. Patience you can measure. I counted the till, which looked like a small bowl of courage. I posted a photo of a tart with a caption that did not beg. "We're here until 7, rain friendly, tea hot, ask about lemon." Light joke 3, I added, "Images may contain crumbs because joy has bad aim." When the bell chimed the last time, I sat on the flour bin and wrote a note to the night. Bake plan printed, Camille's menu drafted, shopping list tight, alarm set for a dawn that forgives. Outside, the street kept its breathing even. Inside, I let my lungs copy it. Failure is a word that belongs to attempts, not to people. I taped that sentence by the register where my hands could read it every time I made change. As I locked up, the sign in the window reflected me back. Apron. hairpinned with the same stubbornness as my hope. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt employed by my own courage. And that was enough to wake up for. I woke into flour-dusted morning, the kind where a bakery's air puts on a soft sweater for you. The mixer blinked its tiny ember eye like a night watchman clocking out as I clocked in. I proofed dough while the city stretched, then started the first run of patachoux, neat rows of small promises that would rise on cue. At 5:42 a.m., Camille's email slid in with precisely what I love: guest count, allergens, a palette, old gold, moonlight, not brass, table dimensions, and a schedule that respected gravity. I printed it, clipped it, and taped a copy to the walk-in door so even the butter would know what time it was. Inventory first, flour with a clean sigh, eggs that passed the float test, cream that wore its freshness without perfume, chocolate that snapped like a good decision, berries that smelled like themselves. I hit the produce market as the doors rolled up like a yawn and spoke in quantities that made the clerk grin. 6 flats of strawberries, I said, the kind that pretend they lived in sunshine their whole childhood. Back at the shop, I wrote the master plan in tiny boxes: bake, cool, assemble, gloss, box, breathe, and set alarms that chime like polite reminders instead of accusations. Elder wisdom: when work gets big, shrink your field of vision until only the next honest action fits. Wash the berries, temper the chocolate, calibrate the oven, because outcomes behave better when tasks get smaller. At 8, Brandon texted, "Pro tip, weddings hate late. Don't embarrass Lila." I looked until the words drained a voltage, then put the phone face down like a lid on a simmer. Minutes later, Lila messaged, "If you need hands, say so." I did. She arrived in a sweatshirt that said relentless but wore it like a question. I gave her jobs with corners, label boxes, weigh sugar, wrap cake boards. She buried her phone without me asking, and the room became noticeably kinder. Quirky fact. Sidebar: pastry people name sugar by its temperature: thread, softball, firm ball, hard ball, soft crack, hard crack. Around 235 degrees F, softball. A drop of syrup in cold water rolls into a gentle pearl, around 300 degrees F, hard crack. It shatters. People have stages. Too, the trick is not letting heat choose your words. We fell into a wordless choreography. I piped chew, Lila filled shells, trays marched into the oven like soldiers and came out like clouds with structure. Light joke 1. The new timer sounds like a tiny submarine pinging for other pastries in the deep. We salute when it beeps because respect is free. I tempered dark chocolate until it gleamed like piano keys and stenciled filigree crowns for the tarts. "It's beautiful," Lila whispered, like she'd expected competence to be louder. A health inspector appeared with an apologetic knock. Routine visit aligned with my deadline the way weather aligns with a bad hair day. "Quick walkthrough," she said. We did the dance, thermometer logs, sanitizer concentration, labels facing front, the fridge held steady, the sink sang compliance. Light joke 2. My hairnet and Dignity shook hands and agreed not to make it a thing. She left with a smile and a compliment about the lemon zest, which I folded into my stamina like egg whites. Academic phrase of the day: planning fallacy. The public argument that people underestimate how long complex tasks take, even when they've done them before. Counterspell, buffer time, checklists, and friends who remind you to eat. We built buffers. Camille's truck would come 2 hours early. I packed backups for the backups, extra shells, spare ganache, an emergency bag of meringues in case gravity got ambitious. The oven, sensing responsibility, began humming in a new register. Light joke 3. I promised it a raise after service. It returned to its usual baritone like a professional. By noon, the shop smelled like discipline disguised as dessert. Lila's phone vibrated itself dizzy. She ignored it until she couldn't and finally said, very small. Brandon's running a poll. Would you risk your wedding cake with a newbie? I kept piping and kept my voice low. He wants reaction. Let's give him consistency instead. She nodded, and a mixing bowl that might have tipped stayed steady. Camille called for a status check. I walked her through the bedtime story for logistics. Croquembouche tower at 90%, caramel threads to finish on site, chocolate tarts cooling now and glossing at 3, citrus kisses boxed and labeled, fruit tartlets assembling at 4 so the berries stay vain and perfect. She exhaled audibly, then warned me about the loading path, a fountain, 2 opportunistic peacocks, and a patch of gravel that eats heels. I added peacock-proof lids and sensible shoes to the list. We taste tested methodically, 1 bite per item, no heroism. Lila groaned at a strawberry like it had told her a secret. Don't fall in love with the inventory, I said, and she laughed, softer than opening day, softer than old arguments. When she squeezed the piping bag too eagerly and a rosette slumped into a blancmange blob. I gave her the pastry spell that saves evenings. Scrape, replace, repeat. She murmured it back, and I watched her shoulders learn the shape of patience. At 3, Brandon burst in holding his phone like a subpoena. Live stream! The viewers want behind the scenes! He swung the camera toward trays that deserve better lighting. Please step outside, I said, blade flat. Food safety and contracts. He scoffed. Who's going to stop me? Lila slid between us without fanfare and pressed him back with a single sentence. Not today. He blinked, surprised at her spine, then at mine, and left muttering about algorithms. The bell gave a tidy ding that sounded like relief. The clock became a gentle tyrant. We boxed in order of travel resilience. I lined the van with non-slip mats, wedged coolers like puzzle pieces, and strapped the tower base as if it had a passport and opinions. Lila wrote labels like formal introductions, tartlets, strawberry, top layer, ganache, dark, do not stack, departure, 4:30, arrival 5 o'clock, assembly 6 o'clock, guests at 7 o'clock, toast at 8 o'clock, cake at 9 o'clock. I added 2 white aprons and a second pair of flats because gravity respects redundancy. During the 10-minute sit-down I always allow before a big service, I texted Camille. En route at 4:30, ETA 5 o'clock, we bring our own calm. She responded with a route map that spared my suspension and a hands-together emoji that read as Amen in logistics. Lila rested her head on the flower bin. I told Brandon not to come tonight, she said. I kissed the crown of her hair the way you do when a truce arrives disguised as scheduling. Thank you, I said, and let silence pay her for the courage. We rolled at exactly 4:30. The sky wore late afternoon gold that flatters everyone. Even vans that have seen errands you wouldn't put on a postcard. I drove like a priest carrying relics. Lila watched corners like a hawk with a clipboard. My litany, breaks are friends, turns are suggestions. Potholes are tests you can refuse. At the gate. The guard checked the list and waved us down a drive that pretended it was a movie. The Blackstone estate rose in cream and glass, a fountain auditioning for a memoir. 2 peacocks regarded us with royal impatience. I parked in the shade and counted to 10, then counted the boxes, then counted my breath. Inside, caterers moved like a well-rehearsed sentence. Camille appeared in black with a headset and the grin of a person who has chosen competence as a lifestyle. You're here, she said, which is the most romantic sentence logistics knows. We set the table against a wall that caught evening light the way gold leaf catches a whisper. And then, quietly, we assembled beauty. Chocolate tarts lined up like piano keys ready for a nocturne. Meringue kisses nested like polite clouds. The croquembouche towered, caramel threads catching lamplight like spun dawn. Lila's hands were sure, mine were steadier than my heart. A quartet tuned, someone rehearsed a toast, and the peacocks denied dessert, muttered scandal in the hedges. When we stepped back, the table looked like restraint had learned to smile. I let myself breathe once, deep. Tomorrow would bring whatever families bring. Tonight. The work stood on its own feet and did not wobble. The ballroom hummed like a beehive that had taken etiquette classes. String lights softened the marble into something that forgave footsteps. The quartet's violins stitched a calm along the ceiling. Our table held its posture. Chocolate tarts glossed like small moons. Citrus meringue kisses ready to vanish on contact. And the croquembouche shimmering in caramel threads as fragile as gossip. Camille gave a satisfied nod that felt better than applause. "Hold this line," she whispered. Meaning, let grace be the first impression and the last. Servers in black drifted by with trays that smelled like money's idea of dinner. I checked the tower's base as if it had a horoscope. Lila polished a stray smudge from a tart ring with a confidence I hadn't yet learned to wear at her age. Guests flowed in a gilded tide, silk whispering, cufflinks winking. A woman in emerald leaned close. "Who did this?" she asked, meaning the table, meaning the restraint. "Nora's Bakery," I said, surprising myself by owning a phrase that used to live only on my dream list. She took a meringue kiss and closed her eyes in a way that made the quartet sound like they'd earned a raise. Elder wisdom. When you finally arrive in a room you've been imagining for years, keep your head down, your eyes kind, and your hands busy. Competence whispers. Let it. The doors opened again, and he entered with the unbothered gravity of someone who doesn't need to announce himself. Victor Langley. Tall, not theatrical, a suit that fit like the tailor had understood the client's moods, a face that looked practiced at listening rather than winning. He spoke to staff before guests, which told me more than his net worth ever could. Camille tipped her chin toward me. He notices details. I looked at my tower and resisted the urge to apologize to it for every caramel string that had its own opinion. Quirky fact. Sidebar. Spun sugar is hygroscopic. It drinks water from the air like a thirsty secret, so on damp nights it slumps. That's why pastry people sprint between beautiful and served, like it's a relay. Tonight. The humidity hovered in the amiable range. I quietly thanked the weather for minding its manners. Victor stopped at our table. "This looks like taste that knows when to stop," he said. "And if that isn't a love letter to self-control, nothing is." "I'm Nora," I answered. "This is my daughter, Lila." He lifted a tart as if it were fragile information. "Do I need a tutorial?" he asked. "Gravity and a napkin," I said. The corner of his mouth made a small, approving decision. He took a bite. The ganache held its line. The crust broke with the sound of a truth told plainly. "You just shut up an entire room of opinionated palates," he said, voice low enough not to bruise the air. I allowed myself one breath that reached my ribs. Academic phrase of the day. The halo effect. The public argument that one excellent trait makes people assume excellence elsewhere. Delicious dessert can make a whole evening feel smarter. It's unfair, but useful, so long as you earn it. Lila's phone vibrated like a tiny guilt. She ignored it, then tucked it deeper into her bag, a gesture I wanted to frame. Camille approached with logistics in her eyes. "We'll refresh at 8, she said. "Can you demo a cream fill for the couple?" I said yes before nerves could audition. We piped shoe with a modest flourish, the cream settling like a well-behaved cloud. People clapped the way adults do when they remember they used to be allowed to clap for joy. Light joke 1. A small boy in a bow tie whispered, very seriously, "Is this tower edible?" I whispered back, without blinking. "Legally, yes." He grinned as if I'd handed him a security clearance. The speeches began. The kind where affection walks a careful line between roast and toast. I adjusted plates by a 1/4 inch because the table's geometry wanted to be the kind of right you can feel, but not measure. 2 guests asked for the lemon tart recipe. I smiled a smile that means I value my rent and said, "There's zest, there's patience, and there's a pact with the oven I can't disclose." Light joke 2. One of the peacocks, banished from dessert, strutted past the French doors and peered in like an ex who'd remembered manners too late. We all pretended not to notice the royal hurt feelings. Victor returned with a woman in her 70s wearing a sapphire wrap and authority. "Nora, this is my Aunt Miriam," he said. "She taught me that sugar can taste expensive without being loud." Miriam studied the spread with the precise kindness of a violin teacher. "You left room on the plate," she said. "People forget space is an ingredient." My chest warmed in the way that means praise has found the place it can do some good. "Thank you," I said, "and thank you for teaching him to notice." We refreshed at 8 on the dot, trace in, trace out, a choreography that made gravity feel respected. Lila carried a rack like she'd been born with forearms. "You did this," she murmured, eyes on the table. But the sentence landed in the part of me that still keeps a cot open for doubt. "We did this," I said, and meant both the bakery and the day we hadn't flinched when Brandon tried to turn my kitchen into content. Light joke 3. A guest asked if the croquembouche required a building permit. I said we'd pulled one under Joy Multi-Story, and he promised to vote for it. Near 9. A quiet corner formed the way whirlpools do, organically. Victor stood there with a plate he didn't seem eager to leave. "Where did you learn to stop?" he asked again, as if restraint were a verb that deserved a resume. "Trial," I said. "And error, mostly error. 12 years of selling brownies to pay the electric bill taught me subtraction." He considered this as if I'd quoted a poem, which is to say, he let silence do useful work. "If you ever want more ovens," he added, "I like boring returns. Flour does better than apps." I smiled and answered with the sentence that kept me safe tonight. "I measure my kitchens in names and leases, not dreams." He didn't flinch. He nodded like I'd passed a test he hoped I'd insist on giving. Somewhere behind us. Laughter rose that didn't belong to Joy. Brandon, live streaming at the French doors, narrated in a tone that made the air thinner. My mother-in-law, yes, the family failure, crashed a Billionaire's party with Costco croissants. Lila moved before I did. She stepped into the frame, calm as a metronome. "Stop," she said, not quietly. "You don't know the difference between a kitchen and a camera." Camille appeared with a manager's smile sharp enough to slice bread. "No filming inside," she said. Hand already outstretched for the phone. Brandon threw a look that bounced. He left with a huff and a handful of comments that would dissolve by morning. The room reseated itself around our table as if the interruption had been a breeze. I checked the tower's spin. It held. Victor's brow lifted in a small arc of concern that didn't condescend. "Occupational hazard of relatives," I said. "I'm sorry for the draft." "You kept the line," he answered, eyes on the desserts. "That's the job." Miriam patted my forearm, as if to stamp that moment with authority. "Most storms are indoor weather," she said. "Serve anyway." Elder wisdom. Second helping. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it labels boxes, recalculates timing, and knows which portion of dignity to save for the ride home. We played it the last round. The tower surrendered its top like a gentleman bowing goodnight. The quartet played something that sounded like a memory returning to its chair. Camille hugged me, a quick, professional gratitude. "You bought me 30 minutes of peace I didn't have," she said. "Invoice with hazard pay for peacocks." When the van door closed on empty racks and satisfying crumbs, the night had the relieved sigh of a theater after curtain. Lila sat in the passenger seat, shoulders squared in a new way. "He called you a failure again," she said, voice steady with shame that wasn't hers to carry. "He did," I said. "And we served anyway." She nodded. "We did." Back at the shop, I laid the knives where morning hands could find them. I wrote, "Rest the feet, not the standards," on a sticky note and pressed it to the espresso machine. In the quiet, I realized the room where I'd been called a failure had just met the room where I am not. And perhaps, finally, those rooms were learning how to share a wall without setting it on fire. Morning after the estate felt like a slow bell, no fanfare, just a steady note that let my hands remember what to do. I prepped dough and stacked trays while the city's traffic stitched its calm outside. Lila came in with 2 coffees and a look that said last night still had a corner in her mind. "He shouldn't have said failure on Alive," she began, then stopped, exhaling like a tire choosing not to hiss. "We served anyway," I said, and slid a sheet of shoe onto the rack. The mixer started its contented hum. I set today's goals where nerves couldn't reach them, by 10. A message came from an unknown number that sounded oddly familiar on the page. "Moon and Mason. Noon? I'll bring respect, you bring a pencil." Victor. I stared at the words until the grin snuck up on me from behind. Lila smirked, all daughter and a pinch of teammate. "Go," she said. "I'll mind the ovens and the trolls." Moon and Mason lived on a corner that collects sunlight like a hobby, inside. Everything was wood, linen, and the kind of quiet that tiptoes around conversation. Victor stood when I entered, small gesture, large meaning, and gestured to a table near a plant that looked too well read to be a ficus. "I owe you a thank you for last night," he said. "You gave my aunt a reason to scold me less about dessert." The waiter set down coffee that smelled like good intentions with a backbone. "We didn't talk money first, we talked tempo." He asked how I cost recipes. I told him my spreadsheet makes every ingredient confess. He asked where the bottlenecks live. I pointed at ovens, staff training, and deliveries that arrive on their own calendar. He listened without interrupting, the way people do who have been taught that silence earns interest. Elder wisdom. Date people, friends, partners, investors, by watching how they treat time. The generous ones let minutes breathe and schedule their ambition around reality. He slid a folder across the table. Thin, no theatrics. "If you ever want more ovens, I prefer bakeries to apps," he said. "But I like dull structures that survive weather. Convertible note, modest cap, your control intact, my returns from scale and patience." I held the folder closed because restraint is a muscle I like to exercise in public. "I'm not allergic to partners," I said, just to glitter that smiles. "I require leases with names and calendars with receipts." He nodded. "I prefer contracts to adjectives." That's academic phrase of the day. Due diligence. The public argument that careful investigation before a deal prevents heartbreak after. It's curiosity, with a clipboard and a timer. And it saves adults from believing in their own adjectives. We walked through what growth could mean without eating the part of my life I want to keep. A second oven, a part-time evening baker, a delivery van that doesn't take its own naps, a utility sink that meets code without sighing. "You'll outpace your fridge before your ambition," Victor said. "Invest there first." I wrote, "Fridge before frosting." Light joke 1. The plant beside us dropped a leaf right on valuation, as if objecting to financial jargon from a moral standpoint. We gave it a sip of water and promised to use smaller syllables. He suggested a visit to my kitchen that wasn't a pop quiz, just an observation hour with Aunt Miriam, who, apparently, audited music schools for fun and could spot false notes faster than thermostats. "She won't tell you what to play," he said. "She'll tell you where the room steals sound." That I could use. Back at the bakery, Lila had survived the lunch rush with a tray of scones arranged like polite neighbors. "He texted," she said, unable to keep the spark tamped down. I slid the folder into a drawer labeled "Read" when calm. Brandon had posted and deleted twice. The comments had a half-life measured in yawns. My till counted out a sigh that sounded like rent plus a small candle. I replaced parchment, fixed the piping tips that prefer drama, and wrote a simple sign. "We're here, we're kind, we butter to the corners." Quirky fact. Sidebar. Laminated doughs like croissants and Queen Amman need strict butter temperatures. Too cold and the layers shatter. Too warm and everything melts into a sulk. The sweet spot is around 55 degrees, which, coincidentally, is the exact temperature at which bakers stop fighting the universe and accept their destiny as thermostat whisperers. At 3, Aunt Miriam walked in. Sapphire scarf demoted to cobalt for daytime. She took a seat near the proofing box as if it were a rehearsal hall. "Pretend I'm furniture," she said. "Show me a cycle." I moved the way the kitchen taught me. Wash, weigh, mix, rest, fold, sheet. She watched my hands more than my words, then asked the questions that matter. Where does fatigue show up first? Which task lies to you about time? Where do you hide contingency? I pointed to the backup tray, the extra piping bag already fitted. The second timer whose tone disagrees with the first so I can hear both. Light joke 2. One timer chirps like a cheerful bird, the other honks like a goose with boundary issues. Miriam declared the goose essential for baker sanity. She tasted a lemon tart, closed her eyes the way some people open windows, and smiled. "You know when to stop," she said, echoing last night's line, then added, "But your oven runs a hair cool on the left." I laughed, relieved to be seen and gently corrected. "I rotate at minute 9, I confessed. "Good," she said. "Keep rotating. Fix the gasket. Perfection is a poor business model." Victor arrived unannounced but not uninvited, carrying flowers that looked like they'd practiced restraint. He didn't crowd the counter, he watched. Asked if he could take out the trash, then did so properly, bag tied, lid wiped. Light joke 3, he returned with a receipt for garbage excellence, which I filed under proof of character. We sat with the folder open at last. Fair terms. Room for my nose. I marked questions in pencil, interest rate relative to risk, cap that respected sweat, timeline that didn't require my soul on weekdays. Lila, perched on a stool, listened like a student auditing an ethics class. Brandon texted her a live location pin and a demand for equal time on camera. She didn't respond. The oven beeped. She grabbed a mitt with the speed of an athlete saving a game. I called my attorney, a brisk woman named Raina who eats term sheets for breakfast and tells you when you have spinach in your teeth. We set a review for Thursday. I sent scans with subject lines that don't flirt. Raina's reply, "Proud of you, we will remove glitter." Evening brought a steady line of customers with faces I was starting to know by pastry. The musician with almond croissant fingers. The nurse who orders 2 baguettes because one is for courage. Victor left quietly, promising to return as a civilian with coffee and a shopping list. Miriam pressed a card into my palm. "Call when the gasket arrives. I'll bring a screwdriver and an appetite. After close." Lila lifted the folder. "Is he decent?" she asked, careful with the word. "So far, his nouns match his verbs," I said. "I'll keep checking." She nodded. "I'll learn the books," she offered. "Not for social, for us." I handed her the petty cash ledger. "Start here," I said. "It's where ambition learns arithmetic." Academic addendum. Because the day asked for it, signaling theory appeared again. People flash signals of competence. Folders, coffee shops, polite suits. The only antidote is paperwork that behaves under stress. I stacked copies, clipped the receipts, and wrote tomorrow's sequence in the voice of a coach who prefers naps to pep talks. I closed the lights one by one until the room held its private glow. The mixer's bowl reflected the exit sign like a small, stubborn star. I taped a note near the espresso machine for opening Nora. Sleep, then dough, then decisions. On my way out, I tested the door twice. Click, click, then rested my palm on the cool glass a moment longer than necessary. As if the bakery could feel gratitude through conduction. Outside, the street side, inside my pocket. The pen from Moon and Mason made a gentle weight against my palm. The kind of small certainty you carry when the next right step is not glamorous, but it is yours. I walked home thinking of gaskets, term sheets, and the rare pleasure of a day where kindness and competence didn't feel like strangers at the same party. Thursday began with the low. Soothing thrum of mixers and a list that didn't try to frighten me. Dough rested under linen like children napping after recess. The walk-in exhaled its small white cloud each time I checked inventory. Lila arrived early, hair up, pencil tucked behind her ear, petty cash ledger under her arm like a passport. Raina confirmed noon, she said, meaning the term sheet review. And Brandon posted again. She held out her phone. Trembling not from fear, but from rage that had run 5 flights of stairs. The caption, "My Emil is getting played by a billionaire who hunts widows with bakeries." A carousel of red string evidence followed. Screenshots. Rumors. A photo of Victor at a ribbon cutting framed to look like a mugshot. I let the words be loud in the device and quiet in the room. Elder wisdom. Never argue with a megaphone. Step away from the volume and walk toward a verified noun. I set the phone face down and spooned lemon curd until the surface shone like a small, honest sun. "We'll let paper talk," I said, "and stoves." By 9:30, the shop was half full of people who measure their days in pastries, the violin teacher who treats herself on Thursdays, a mail carrier with a croissant route of his own, 2 college kids sharing a tart like it contained scholarship money. My mind kept walking back to the folder, waiting for Raina, and the way Victor had carried out the trash like it was a privilege. Light joke 1. I promised the oven I wouldn't propose to any appliances today. It raised the temperature by 2 degrees in what I took as a gentle blush. At 11. The bell chimed and a woman stepped in, wearing a cardigan the color of a legal pad. "Paula," she introduced herself, eyes skittering. "Friend of a friend. We need to talk privately about Langley." She said his name the way some people say termite. Lila began wiping the already clean counter, listening with her shoulders. I set a tray of cooling tart shells on a rack and guided Paula to the two-top by the window. She unfolded a rehearsed story, how Victor targets older women owners, offers help, then takes control when they falter. She claimed to be a former partner, voice quivering like gelatin that hasn't set. "Dates?" I asked. "Lease names? Who represented you in the deal?" She flinched at nouns the way light makes certain birds startle. "It's complicated," she said. "But if you pay me for consulting, I can get you documents." Her eyes glanced to Lila, then to the register. It smelled like a pitch, not a warning. Academic phrase of the day. Confirmation bias. The public argument that once we believe a story, our minds gather only the facts that keep that story warm, and ignore the ones that send it outside to cool. Antidote. Make the opposite case on paper and see which version keeps its verbs. I texted Raina under the table. Woman named Paula with smear story for money. Joined call early? Raina sent back a thumbs up and the words, "Ask for docket numbers." I did. Paula's mouth tried 3 numbers, like keys on the wrong ring. I thanked her for coming, offered a croissant for the road, and said, "If you email me case numbers and pleadings, I'll read every page. No consulting fee needed." She declined the pastry and the accountability, then left with a flurry that made the bell sound guilty. Sidebar. Quirky fact, parchment paper is treated with sulfuric acid to gelatinize the surface fibers, then thoroughly washed, so butter doesn't penetrate. The sheet becomes both nonstick and a little heroic. Bakers love it because it lets delicate things release without drama. I wrote, "Be parchment, not Velcro," on my prep list. At noon, Raina's face appeared on my laptop, glasses reflecting a forest of clauses. "Good news," she began. "This draft speaks in indoor voices. Interest reasonable. Cap not insulting. You keep control. And there's an exit that doesn't feel like a trap door. I want to tighten audit rights, ban advisory fees forever, and tie any expansion to lease names we can find in the county records." Lila listened, absorbing vocabulary the way dough absorbs butter, slowly, then all at once. "Also," Raina added, "I recognized your Paula. She's been compensated before to dramatize. Classic paid narrative laundering. Tell your daughter to screenshot everything. We may need a spool of context." Light joke 2. Raina's cat walked across the keyboard and typed, which she translated as, "Consider an indemnification clause." We all agreed the cat was management. As the lunch crowd thinned, Lila set up a simple books corner on the back table, ledger, bank statements, calculator. She underlined a truth that deserved ink. We were solvent. Not smug, rent paid, vendors timely, buffer modest but breathing. I pulled from the walk-in a pan of pâte à choux that had proved exactly like it read a map. The second the shells went into the oven, Brandon appeared in the doorway with a camera crew that looked like two friends and a ring light. "Exclusive," he announced, "a warning to women being scammed." "Turn around," I said. Voice pitched to the register that powders a room without making it cough. He smirked. "You can't stop the truth." Lila stepped in front of him, eyes level. "We can stop you from filming private patrons," she said. "And we can remind you that defamation loves screenshots." Raina, blessed be, had insisted we print a no filming sign. Lila pointed to it like a traffic cop pointing at the law. Brandon's ring light wavered. His friends pretended their batteries died. I invited him outside, on the sidewalk. The city kept breathing. "We do not crowd our future with your content," I said. "If you think Victor is dangerous, file a report with case numbers. Otherwise, go sell vitamins to your followers." He tried a laugh that sounded like a zipper catching. "You'll regret ignoring me." "I'll regret burning caramel," I said. "So I'm going back inside." Back at the bench, the shoe had puffed into tidy compliments. I tapped the bottoms, hollow, done, then split and filled with pastry cream that lay down like it understood bedtime. Lila piped rosettes with the concentration of someone writing her own name properly for the first time. Light joke 3. The new tip coughed once and decorated my sleeve. We declared it modern art and moved on. Victor texted, "Raina may call me. Happy to open my books within deal scope." Minutes later, Raina emailed a list no prideful person would accept unless they were clean. References, audited statements, list of companies where he's minority investor and ones where he exited. 3 landlord contacts from the last 5 years. Victor replied with attachments and the line, "Send more requests if your sleep needs them." My shoulders, which had been wearing earrings of tension, unclasped. By 3. The smear carousel had started to slow online. Attention had chased someone else's chaos. We sold out of lemon tarts, which I chose to interpret as empirical proof that reality still enjoys nuance. Aunt Miriam stopped by with a gasket and a screwdriver, declared my oven less sulky, then bought 2 Koh-i Naman for research. She looked at Lila's ledger corner and nodded once, approving the stillness that numbers bring. In the late afternoon quiet, I wrote a 1-page opposite case and forced myself to argue against Victor. Reasons not to take the money even on good terms. Loss of autonomy if growth outruns joy, staff strain, mornings that stop smelling like butter because my life smells like meetings. Then I wrote the 4-page, more ovens, fair pay, health insurance for 2 part-timers, time off that isn't a rumor. I taped both to the wall where the light hits honest. We closed with hands that had earned their soap. Lila stacked chairs, then hesitated. I paid Paula, she said, voice small but unflinching, for a story. Before I knew better, I wanted a narrative that made you listen to me about Victor. The room tilted and then righted. I set the towel down. Thank you for telling me, I said. We'll refund your panic in good decisions instead of cash. She nodded, swallowing a storm. I'll email Reina everything. After she left, I sat with the quiet that remains when a day decided not to erupt. I wrote a card for tomorrow. Due diligence is a love language. Use nouns, praise in the kitchen, decide at the table, sign only after sleep. I taped it above the binder labeled simple because that's still the folder that saves me. When I turned the key in the lock, the glass gave back my reflection, flower on my sleeve, lemon under my nails, a steadiness growing new roots. The sign said, closed. And what it meant tonight was not finished, just pausing. Friday opened like a ledger that had already balanced itself. Quiet columns of light. A to-do list that worded things kindly. I started with brioche because enriched doughs forgive clumsy mornings. Lila arrived early, hair in a no-nonsense knot, an envelope for Reina, and a look that said she planned to keep breathing even when guilt tried to choreograph otherwise. We didn't perform reconciliation, we practiced it, box by labeled box. She scanned Brandon's post and her own text to Paula into a single PDF named What I Did and How I'll Fix It, then forwarded it to Reina with the subject line. Documentation for accountability. There is a noise paper makes when it puts drama out of work. I heard it. Victor texted at 8:07. Audited statements plus landlord references in a shared folder. Coffee later if your ovens allow. The folder existed. The numbers behaved. The landlord for Moon & Mason responded within 5 minutes. Rent paid on time, clauses honored, no theatrics. A different owner confirmed he'd exited a minority position when operations drifted from the plan, cleanly, with receipts. My palms stopped doing that thing where they audition as sweat glands. Lila, peeking over my shoulder, whispered, His nouns keep matching his verbs. So far, I said, and that's the only speed we use. Elder wisdom. Safeguards don't mean you expect betrayal. They mean you respect gravity. Every promise should have a handrail, clear timelines, exit doors that aren't hidden, and a budget that keeps the lights on when optimism calls in sick. By 10, the shop found its hum. The violin teacher celebrated a student's stubborn vibrato with an almond croissant. A nurse bought 2 Queen Amman for research, which is also what I call joy when I need to sound practical. Light joke 1. The espresso machine threw a tiny tantrum and then apologized by pulling the best shot of the week. We accepted with conditions. I restocked lemon curd and put a sticky note on the walk-in. Temptation not stored here. Reina called at noon sharp, voice brisk but pleased. Term sheet is civilized, she said. I've added a no sideshow clause, tightened reporting, built a sleep before expansion requirement, and tied further funding to leases we can see at the county clerk's window. He accepted every red line within 10 minutes. I looked at the clock as if it would confirm manners had become fashionable. 2 signatures remain, she continued. Yours and the part of you that thinks you don't deserve ease. I smiled because she was not entirely wrong. Academic phrase of the day. Prospect theory. The public argument that people fear losses more than they crave equivalent gains. A $10 loss hurts more than a $10 win delights. In business. That bias can make us hoard caution or chase risk to make it back. The antidote is a pre-committed plan. Decide the rules before the feelings show up with loud opinions. We met Victor at Moon and Mason with documents printed and clipped like they hoped to be framed. Aunt Miriam sat with a notebook that looked like it had audited sonatas. 1 hour, Victor said, setting his phone face down. If we can't explain it in an hour, we don't understand it. We walked through the term sheet line by line. He read aloud the clause requiring a full night's sleep before signing any lease over a certain amount and grinned. I wish more of my founders had this, he said. I wish more of my kitchens had it. I answered. Light joke too. The plant beside us shed another leaf exactly when we said valuation. As if protesting compound nouns, Miriam whispered. It has taste. We signed. Not like people grabbing a life raft, but like adults putting dates on decisions. He wired the first modest tranche during dessert, then asked if he could carry a box to my car. I said yes, because chivalry that pays rent is my favorite genre. Back at the bakery. The funds appeared with the quiet dignity of a friend who arrives on time and doesn't need to be thanked twice. I paid the invoice for the new gasket and ordered a reach-in fridge that had no interest in surprises. Lila updated the cash flow sheet, then colored a cell green. Not because we'd won, but because we'd aligned the calendar with reality. Sidebar. Quirky fact, the proofing in bread isn't just convincing the dough to rise. It's also an old term for proving yeast is alive. Bakers would mix a little flour, water, and yeast to prove the organism before committing sacks of flour. I like the old meaning. We test small before we promise big. By mid-afternoon, Brandon attempted a victory lap with a new video. They fell for it. Watch the implosion. His comments did not behave for him. A few of his own followers posted screenshots of the court order from last week in the car story. Others linked to Lila's quiet apology she'd pinned to her page. I paid for a lie. It ended today. I will be better with nouns than noise. My chest loosened, not at his flailing, but at her sentence with its spine showing. The fridge delivery crew arrived, 2 men who lifted with their legs and their hearts. Light joke 3. One asked if we wanted the unit christened, then gently knocked on its side and said, "Welcome to your forever home," which made Lila cry for exactly 6 unembarrassed seconds. We slid it into place, leveled it with a carpenter's patience, and promised it a life free of mystery odors. At 4, the door chimed and Paula reappeared, agitated and poorly organized. "You should know Victor settled with me," she announced, triumphant like someone who's misread a map. "Proof he's bad." I motioned toward the back table where Raina, summoned earlier, sat with a file. "Or proof that he pays nuisance claims when the math says time is more expensive," Raina replied, calm as a calendar. "Since you're here, will you sign this statement about who hired you and for how much?" Paula's eyes flicked toward the exit. "Or we can subpoena," Raina added, as if discussing pastry choices. Paula left without dessert or dignity. The bell performed a tiny elegy. We closed the loop not with speeches, but with systems. Lila drafted a family boundary note. No filming in the shop, no defamatory posts without documents, no interviews during service. She emailed it to Brandon with a single sentence. "I'm not available for your content." He replied with silence, which is the most respectful thing he said in weeks. We used the last hour to practice a future where help exists. I trained Lila on cost percentages, how flour costs should live near one number and butter another. She caught on fast, asked better questions than I did when I was twice her age, and wrote her own rule. We don't discount to buy affection. She was learning to season the kitchen and the books with the same restraint. Evening settled as if it had been waiting in line politely. Lorna from next door popped in with the rumor of a community festival seeking vendors who can count to 90 without panicking. I wrote the date on the wall calendar and said yes with the confidence of someone who owns a reach-in fridge and a term sheet that sleeps well. We boxed the last loaves, wiped the last counters, and stood for a minute in the clean. I pulled down the rolling gate halfway, then paused. The bakery had grown a millimeter. The way rooms do when earnest money meets an actual need, a fridge that hums, a closet that guards, a plan that doesn't bully. I wrote tomorrow's stack in block letters Lila could read at 5 a.m. Laminate, proof, glaze, payroll, thank Victor's wire with receipts. On the way out, I slid an index card under the register, a private ritual. If fear wakes you, count ovens, not enemies, turn nouns into friends. Remember that a clause is a kindness. I locked up, hands steady on the cool glass, and walked home through a city that didn't know me and somehow cheered anyway. When my head finally met the pillow, I thought about the first croissant I folded 12 years ago beside an electric bill that needed persuading, and about today's signatures that felt like the opposite of a rescue, more like two adults agreeing to keep boring promises in the same direction. Somewhere, a new fridge practiced its lullaby. Somewhere my daughter slept with a ledger under her pillow. And somewhere, mercifully far away, a ring light ran out of battery. Saturday settled over the bakery like a warm towel, gentle weight, easy breath, the kind of morning where flour behaves and people do, too. The new reach-in hummed in a key I decided was hopeful. The gasket Miriam helped install sat snug, a small victory with manners. Lila arrived with hair up, clipboard out, and the steady look of someone who has chosen a different verb for herself today. We worked in companionable quiet. I laminated, she reconciled. The room felt like two clocks agreeing on the hour. We began installing the safeguards we'd promised on paper. I wrote a one-page how we decide and taped it inside the office cupboard. Sleep before big signatures. Quote in writing, pay vendors on Wednesdays. Kindness at the counter. Precision at the books. Lila drafted a training sheet for weekend help. Glove changes. Thermometer logs. What to do when the espresso machine develops opinions. Elder wisdom. Systems are just love notes you write to your tired future self. Short, legible, and taped where your hands already go. A young applicant named Danny came at 9 sharp. Quiet, quick, eyes that notice crumbs and pick them up without narrating it. I put her on meringue kisses. Steady squeeze, stop before the swirl gets smug, I said. She nodded, made 3 that looked like punctuation at the end of a kind sentence, and I hired her between trays. Light joke 1. The new piping tip sneezed once and dotted my nose with sugar. Danny solemnly handed me a napkin like we were in pastry church. We were. Victor texted a photo of a delivery van with 2 words, borrowed wheels. He rolled up an hour later, changed into a plain apron without ceremony, and asked where to stand that would not be in anyone's way. Trash, recycling, and fall behind dish pit, I said. He saluted the dish pit as if it outranked him, which it does in most kitchens. Aunt Miriam followed with a screwdriver and a lemon, the first to fix, the second to keep us honest. Quirky fact. Sidebar. Baker's dozen comes from medieval England, when selling short measure could get you fined or worse. Bakers started throwing in an extra loaf to be safe, ever since. 13 has been the most honest number flour knows. We packed 13 raspberry tartlets for a catering pickup, 12 for the guests. 1 for the inevitable cousin who arrives late with stories. By mid-morning, I noticed something new in Lila's posture. Less flinch, more hinge. She looked up from the ledger and said, almost shy, when inventory turns in under a week, our cash flow smiles. We smile today. She pointed to a column she'd colored the soft green of permission. Light joke 2. The reach-in made a gentle chirp like it wanted to be included in the celebration. We promised it first pick of sticker labels. Academic phrase of the day. Goodhart's Law. The public argument that when a measure becomes a target, it stops being a good measure. If we chase 5-star reviews instead of clean bakes and kind service, the stars get louder while the crust gets worse. Our answer We measure what we can touch: temps, times, waste, wages, and let the internet applaud if it wants to. At noon, a small turbulence arrived. 3 brand new 1-star reviews materialized within minutes, each featuring the same odd phrase: grocery store butter, which we do not buy and never will. Lila inhaled sharply. I handed her the nearby towel, the bakery's version of a grounding stone. Paper, I said. We documented, flagged, and moved on. Customers still lined up, the croissant layers still lifted like they believed in steam. Our goal remained the same: serve the person in front of us, not the rumor behind us. Danny slid a tray into the oven and whispered, "We're fine." It felt like a benediction from someone who had been here an hour and already understood the room. Around 1. Brandon tried the door and stopped at the no filming sign as if the letters had grown teeth. He didn't come in. He paced, then left. The ring light dangling like an apology his arm didn't know how to make. Lila watched through the glass and didn't follow. There are so many ways to choose your family. And today, she chose a thermometer and a ledger. Victor worked the pit like he enjoyed humility. He stacked cooling racks, wiped the undershelf no one ever wipes, and took out 3 bags of trash without turning it into a sonnet. Light joke 3. He labeled a tub "mystery frosting, do not trust," and slid it to the discard bin as if protecting us from ourselves. Aunt Miriam adjusted the left oven foot by a quarter turn and announced, "Now it sings in tune with the right." She bought 2 kauinaman for research again, which is just science with crumbs. In the lull, I wrote tomorrow's production map: counts by hour, backups by tray, lamination windows where the butter's temper and mine could meet. Lila added a section titled Reality Check, where we listed what actually sold versus what our feelings swore would sell. Feelings wanted pistachio everything. Reality wanted lemon and dark chocolate holding hands. We believed reality and scheduled accordingly. We also talked about the shape of growth that wouldn't eat the bakery's soul. "Second oven first," I said. "Then 2 more morning hours of help. Delivery window every Friday for pre-orders. Capped so nobody hates us or themselves." Victor suggested a modest wholesale trial, 50 croissants to Moon & Mason on Saturdays with their label and ours. Strict quality clause. Friendly exit if either of us frowned. He offered to draft the memo with Raina's frown in mind. We accepted, not because he asked, but because the number said the dough had room to stand taller without tearing. In the afternoon, a woman came in on careful feet. "I'm from the festival board," she said. "We heard you keep promises. We need a vendor who can count to 90 without panicking." I pointed at the reach-in like a proud parent. "We have a new friend," I said. We chose a menu we could defend under heat: lemon bars, brownies with a backbone, and a small pride of croissants. We wrote down the booth fee and the refund policy because polite paper keeps friendships. Toward 4. The counter filled with neighbors whose names my hands already knew. The nurse with 2 baguettes, 1 for courage. The violin teacher grading scales with almond crumbs. The mail carrier who times his route to our end-of-day kauinaman. They didn't ask about the 1 stars. They asked if we had more lemon. We did. The register made its modest music. I remembered the night Brandon called me failure, and the room where his word tried to live felt far away. A bad rental with thin walls and no light. We closed early enough to rest well and late enough to call it honest. I made staff meal, grilled cheese on today's country loaf, chopped salad with basil that still believed in noon, 1 lemon bar sliced into fourths because sugar is not a currency we spend carelessly. We ate at the back table and reviewed the small, boring wins: waste down 3%, labor on target, inventory dated, dough scheduled, feelings acknowledged but not in charge. After dishes. Victor walked me the long way around the block, past windows that held their evening and a dog who winked like a barista. We didn't talk about term sheets. We talked about Aunt Miriam's favorite recordings and the strange comfort of a reach-in fridge that says little and does a lot. You know, he said. Romance has a bad habit of competing with people's real lives. I prefer to be an upgrade to the boring parts: trash, rides, receipts. I laughed, because that is my language. Bring coffee at 5, I said. Upgrade the dawn. At home. I set out my shoes for morning, sturdy, clean, unpretentious. I put a sticky note on my nightstand. Nouns tomorrow, counts, temps, names. Let the internet be a weather report, not a religion. Before sleep, I texted Lila. Proud of your green cell? She replied with a photo of her ledger corner and 3 words I didn't know I needed. Working on boring. That's the song I want for us. Back in the bakery, the timers rested. The bowls reflected the exit sign like small moons, and the reach-ins sang its quiet note. The room held our day like a gentle palm, systems where panic used to be. People where performance used to stand, and a future that didn't need to shout to be heard. Tomorrow would bring a festival form and croissant counts and, likely, a fresh attempt at noise. That's fine. We have parchment. We have names. We have a training sheet taped where hands already go. Sunday arrived with the slow, forgiving light that makes stainless steel look like a lake before anyone's touched it. We opened to a small queue. Neighbors in sandaled patience. A jogger who buys croissants as penance. A grandfather whose grandson calls Danishes morning pizza. Lila checked temps, counted the till, and set the training sheet where hands already go. Danny piped meringues with the same unshowy attention she gives to breathing. The reach-in hummed in its key of good behavior. I pressed my palm to the counter, cool and factual, and told the room, "We're ready." By 10. The grand opening, again, but real balloons, bobbed by the front window. No arch. Just 3 buoyant circles that refused to be solemn. Victor rolled in early with coffee and a toolbox, checked the back door latch, then retreated to the dish pit like humility had a season pass. Aunt Miriam arrived with a lemon and a tiny level, declaring, "2 of the world's most useful instruments." I laughed and lifted a tray. The bakery answered by smelling like butter had made a decision in our favor. The first small war showed up dressed as concern. A donor from the community foundation stopped by with a cordial frown and a printout of last night's rumor thread. Anonymous posts warning sponsors that Nora's Bakery is a vanity project fronted by a predator investor who flips failing shops for write-offs. The phrases were polished, the claims, gelatin. "We just need clarity," he said, as if clarity were something you could pour. I handed him copies of our lease, the registered vendor permit for next month's festival, and the boring term sheet with Raina's red lines that could sing a lullaby if you read it too late. He scanned the first pages, then the signatures, and the frown unhooked. "Thank you," he said. "People forget paper is a form of kindness." He bought 6 lemon bars, which is also a form of kindness. Elder wisdom: when gossip tries to rent a room in your life, make it fill out a form. Names, dates, amounts, and require a deposit in reality. Rumor hates paperwork the way sugar hates rain. We posted our soft manifesto on the door where sunlight could read it. We count temps, not clicks. We answer with receipts, not reels. If you need proof, ask. Inside, the line inched forward with the pace of a museum. Quiet, observant, choosing. Lila's shoulders forgot to flinch. Danny labeled boxes with little arrows showing which side knew how to open. The register made its polite music and did not apologize for it. At noon, the foundation emailed an invite. Showcase table at tonight's donor mixer, 1 hour, 2 bites per guest, and a brief chat about what real growth looks like. I prepped a menu that behaved under mingling. Lemon squares cut tiny and precise, dark chocolate tart slivers that didn't smear suit, and miniature shoe with a caramel dot like a yes. Lila built a transport checklist with the calm of someone who has learned to speak list. Victor volunteered the van with the early-to-meetings engine. Miriam packed her level like it might fix the conversation. Academic phrase of the day: reputational cascade. The public argument that people adopt a belief because others appear to believe it. Not because they have evidence. The cure is a public, verifiable counterexample, names, dates, and something you can taste. We arrived early to a hall that smelled like well-ironed linens and new initiatives. I set the table, left space on the plate, and propped a small card. Ask us about permits. Ask us about payroll. Ask us about butter. A man with an eager tie tried. So, are you the widow in the Billionaire's portfolio? I smiled. I'm the baker with a refrigerator and a budget, I said, and a contract that insists on sleep before leases. He laughed, then read the card, then ate a lemon square with the posture of a convert. Light joke 1. The PA system kept announcing housekeeping in a voice so soothing I almost asked it to read me to sleep. We christened it the ASMR of logistics. Half an hour in, the second wave of whispers arrived. A BCC bomb, an email to donors from concerned community linking last week's forged signature chaos from another story to us by implication and vibe. Reina, who lives 2 blocks away and smells legal trouble before the wind does, texted. Forward it. I'll reply to all with the court order, your vendor license, and a short lesson on defamation. 10 minutes later, she appeared at the mixer in flats in a blazer that made paper feel proud. She spoke once, slowly, with exhibits. You could feel the room's appetite return to the table. Sidebar. Quirky fact, the word lemon shows up in English to mean a defective purchase around the early 20th century, but in pastry and drinks. Lemon is the opposite of a dud. It brightens heavy things, cuts through the fog, and convinces sweetness to stand up straight. We are, unabashedly, lemon people. Back at the bakery, the 1-star reviews multiplied like damp gremlins. Same phrasing. Timestamps too neat. Lila documented, flagged, and breathed. We'll drown them in pastry and paper, she said. A sentence that wears both apron and tie. Danny, learning the house tone, added, and humor. She taped a tiny sign near the tip jar. Tips fund staff snacks and a thermometer therapy retreat. Customers obliged. The jar smiled. We bought yogurt and a second timer. Light joke 2. A little boy asked if Kuinaman were legal. I answered, barely, but we have a permit. And he saluted like we'd just won pastry court. Evening. The donor mixer's final hour. A couple approached with the careful energy of people accustomed to hearing yes before they finish asking. We mentor small businesses, the woman said, but most of them mistake velocity for accuracy. What do you measure? I pointed to my list. Waste under 3%, labor proportionate to actual sales, dough temp at lamination, and the number of times per week we say no to feature creep. They nodded in the rhythm of relief. We'd like your bakery to teach a session, the man said. Title it, The Boring Parts That Keep Dreams Alive. I could hear Aunt Miriam clapping in her head. The third skirmish was almost funny. Brandon went live from his car, eyes big with prophecy. It's happening again. Watch the downfall. His viewers, tired of prophecy without nouns, asked for court numbers and leases. He deflected into vitamins. The chat pivoted to a meme about lemon bars. His feed sound cut out. Mine did not. Light joke 3, during a lull. The house music accidentally cued a 1980s power ballad about second chances. We rolled with it and plated cream puffs like a slow-motion montage. We packed up to leave. The foundation director shook my hand with both of his and pressed a check toward the vendor fee for the festival. We cover our speakers, he said. Also, those lemon squares made our board like each other. Back in the van, Victor drove the long route home, avoiding potholes with the courtesy of a man who knows how to carry what matters. Lila texted Raina the latest screenshots. Raina replied with a thumbs up and a note. If they escalate, we escalate calmly. We returned to the bakery to finish the day the way I love best: sweeping, labeling, dating, setting out tomorrow's butter to reach 55 dm while no one is watching. The room wore the soft fatigue of a gym after a good class. I wrote Monday's prep list in pencil because reality edits. Lila taped new systems love notes inside the cupboard. A tiny flowchart that begins with, "Is this on paper?" and ends with, "Sleep first." On the walk to the car, Victor asked if I wanted dinner or quiet. "Quiet at my table," I said. He set down a bag of groceries, eggs, tomatoes, a loaf we hadn't sold because it was reserved for us. "I'm not a rescue," he said, like a vow to the space between us. "I'm a ride to the store and a signature that respects nouns." I smiled. "Bring the lemons," I said. "We're running a cascade of our own." At home. I wrote a single card and tucked it above the simple binder. Reputation travels by rumor, restoration travels by receipt. Bake both, but serve the second. The fan made its bedtime syllable. The city agreed to dim a notch. When I closed my eyes, I saw lemon squares in perfect rows, a level on a linen cloth, a parade of donors chewing thoughtfully, and a daughter highlighting the ordinary green of solvency. The war hadn't ended. It had gotten bored. The bakery didn't care about wars. It cared about dough and names and mornings that smell like a decision leaning the right way. Monday breathed like a fresh ledger page, margins wide, lines ready, no hurry in the ink. We opened with the clean choreography: butter out, ovens on, temps logged, till counted, kindness preheated. Lila pinned the weekend's systems love notes inside the cupboard and added one more arrow to her flowchart. If rumor knocks, handed the receipts, return to dough. Danny slid in at 6:59 with her quiet yes, tied her apron, and began piping meringues that looked like punctuation for good news. By 9. The foundation director confirmed the festival booth and the teaching slot, the boring parts that keep dreams alive. 15 minutes and questions. I wrote an outline on a flour-dusted card. Waste under 3%. Sleep before signature. Name the landlord, pay vendors on Wednesdays. Measure temps, not vibes. Victor texted, "Need a ride for racks?" and followed it with a photo of Ernest, the borrowed van, already yawning its doors. He was learning our dialect, nouns first, offer second. Compliments later if the crumb deserves it. The morning brought one more wave of tidy sabotage, a letter to the health department alleging we store dairy next to raw eggs. Timestamp Sunday at a time when 3 of us were watching lemon squares become proof that geometry can taste like sunlight. The inspector arrived with a neutral clipboard and the face of a person who values facts. We walk the line, walk in at 37 degree F. Dairy sealed and dated. Eggs shelved like introverts who enjoy order. Sanitizer at the right parts per million. She smiled at the training sheet taped where hands already go. "If every rumor came with documentation like this," she said, "I'd be bored out of a job." I offered a lemon square for her break. She declined like a professional and took a photo of our logs like a fan. Elder wisdom. Pace your proofs. The fastest way to lose a week is to sprint every mile. Bake the batch, not the rumor. Count the scones, not the Snickers. Save your yes for the next verifiable noun. At noon, I drafted the talk and made it edible. We called it a receipt tasting. Guests would hold 3 cards: temp, time, waste. Then eat 1 lemon square precisely cut, 1 chocolate sliver weighed to the gram, and 1 cream puff filled to a line we'd sharpied inside the bag. Accuracy you can chew, Lila said, like a tagline invented by sleep and pride. Miriam approved from her stool with a lemon in her pocket and the tiny level in her palm. "Bring the goose timer," she said. "People learn better when something honks at them." Quirky fact. Sidebar. Parchment paper is measured by basis weight. How many pounds a ream weighs at a standard size. Too light and it tears. Too heavy and your meringues sulk. My favorite is the Goldilocks of parchment, 39 pounds. It releases without drama and behaves under caramel like a diplomat. 3 light jokes made their rounds without begging for laughs. First, Ernest tried to pair with the espresso machine and we declared them engaged. Lila printed a tiny registry that listed dish soap and an extra thermometer. Second, the reach-in beeped once, its little aria of satisfaction, when Danny labeled every pan with dates so tidy they looked monogrammed. Third, the goose timer honked during a lull and the line applauded. We gave it a tiny bow. By mid-afternoon, Raina emailed, "Cease and desist drafted for the anonymous smear, plus a memo for the Foundation's Council on reputational cascades and why receipts break them. Forward at will." I taped a copy near the office phone. Not to wave around, just to remind the room that grown-ups live here, too. On the street, Brandon filmed on mute, then on loud, then on mute again. He paced the length of our window, ring light like a moon that forgot its job. Lila didn't flinch. She portioned pastry cream to the Sharpied line, set boxes by rack order, and only once whispered to the sink. "We are busy." When he finally came in, as a customer, he tried to pay with a pitch. "Let me feature you in a special, tell-all, on predatory money." I rang up his coffee, handed him a receipt with the return policy that only works on items that exist, and said, "We do tell-alls. They're called audits." He left with a paper cup and fewer viewers. Academic phrase of the day. Base rate neglect. The public argument that we overreact to vivid anecdotes and ignore the boring statistics that actually predict outcomes for bakeries. The base rate says most fail because of cash flow and sloppy costs, not curses or villains. The antidote is arithmetic with a bedtime. Evening tilted toward the festival workshop. We packed the van with racks and a sensible number of dreams. Miriam loaded her level like a talisman. Danny tucked extra bags. Victor brought water bottles and tape because tape prevents poetry from tripping. The community hall buzzed with hopeful booths and folding chairs that had seen 1,000 pep talks and a few useful ones. Our talk landed in the second category because it included a thermometer, a ledger, and sugar. We began with the goose honk at exactly 140 degrees of. "Safe holding for custard," I said, and passed the lemon squares in perfect cubes. "Accuracy," I offered, "is a love language for your future tired self." Lila held up the lease card. "Landlord of record? Name? Permit number? Actual digits. Wire to a W-9, the one that matches." The room nodded the way rooms do when relief arrives disguised as homework. A young vendor asked how we handled online storms. "By measuring something we can touch," I said, tapping the temp card. "By answering with paper, not performance," Lila added. Miriam, not scheduled to speak, lifted the level and said, "And by checking if the counter is lying to you." Hands went up for Q&A. Someone asked about investors. Victor didn't wave. He washed tasting spoons and listened. I said, "If money wants to help, it'll tolerate your safeguards. If it needs you to hurry, it wants your panic more than your product." A woman in a denim apron whispered, "I thought I was the only one who made clauses that forced me to sleep." We gave her a spare copy with our sleepy clause circled. We wrapped in applause that felt like a well-cut pastry. Crisp, not showy. The foundation director handed over a check that covered booth fees and a little more. The kind that makes rent feel like a teammate on our way out. A teenager approached with shy gravity. "My mom says you're the failure of the family," he blurted, then flushed red. "But I watched you measure." He held out a crooked lemon square he'd cut himself at home. We're trying. I took a bite. It tilted. It was perfect. Back at the bakery, we unloaded by muscle memory. The reach and welcome trays with the contentment of a cat who trusts your routine. We set out tomorrow's butter to that faithful 55-degree oven and taped a fresh note on the cupboard. We don't chase stars, we polish trays. Danny left with flour on her shoes and dignity on her face. Miriam flattened a stubborn foot on the pastry rack half a turn and declared, "Now it sings with the floor." Lila hovered by the door as the last customers drifted out. "I sent Brandon the family boundary note again," she said, "and I told him I'm done being content." Her eyes were tired but clear, the way dough looks after proof, risen, not inflated. She tucked a photo into the binder, our table at the donor mixer. The little card that said, "Ask us about butter," the faces of people deciding to believe in nouns. "I'm keeping a wins folder," she added, "for when weather tries to speak louder than work." I hugged her the way you hug someone who has decided to be a hinge instead of a flinch. We ate staff meal on upside-down sheet pans, grilled cheese, basil salad, one chocolate tart sliver divided with the kind of knife that understands fairness. Victor washed the last pan like a man voting for a small future. He didn't say proud. He asked, "Tomorrow's counts?" And I loved him exactly as much as that sentence deserves. Before lights out, I wrote 3 lists: bake, counts, and backups. Paper, festival invoice, vendor insurance card, health inspection report filed. People, Danny's race review in 2 weeks, Lila's Tuesday off as non-negotiable, Miriam's lemon tax, 1 per visit. I taped them near the simple binder so morning hands could find them without thinking. Outside, the street had that patient. Late summer breath. Inside, the goose timer settled. The bowls reflected the exit sign's small moonlight, and the reach-in sang its key. I swept the last line of flour, tested the latch, click, and stood in the doorway long enough to feel the hinge do its small, honest job. The war of whispers kept whispering somewhere else, here, in this little room that smells like proof and work. We practiced our plain, stubborn truths. We count, we cool, we clip, we sleep, we serve. Tomorrow will be whatever noise attempts. We'll answer with parchment, with logs, with lemon, with a line that holds. Festival morning began with a hush that felt like the inside of a seashell, steady, circular, a small ocean of calm I could hold in my hands. Butter waited at its faithful 55-degree oven. The reach-in sang its modest note, and Lila set out the receipt tasting cards, temp time waste, like place settings for grown-up hope. Danny arrived with an apron already tied in that quiet yes of hers. Victor rolled up the borrowed van, checked the straps, and asked, "Counts?" I read them off like prayer: croissants, lemon bars, chocolate slivers, cream puffs to the line we'd sharpied inside the bag. Aunt Miriam tucked her tiny level into her pocket and adjusted a rack foot a quarter turn. "Now the floor and the tray are friends," she said, which is exactly how I want my days to behave, on site. The park smelled like cut grass and new plants. Tents lifted their shoulders. Volunteers found their lanyards. And a brass trio tuned in a corner like the weather had requested a waltz. We set our table under gentle shade, left space on the plates, and taped our manifesto to the leg. We count temps, not clicks. Ask us for proof. A line formed without announcement. People chose with the patience of a museum, a lemon square bright enough to wake the kind parts of the mouth, a chocolate sliver that broke with that small, honest click, a cream puff that exhaled like a polite secret. The first interruption wore cologne and certainty. Brandon arrived with a handheld mic and a grin that tried to read as concern. "For my followers," he began. Tell us about the predator funding behind... He stalled because a child tugged his sleeve to ask if the lemon squares were legal. Elder wisdom. When performance tries to borrow your hour, give your time to the person who's actually here, serve the slice, answer the name, let the room decide what to remember. I handed the child a perfect, legal square and pointed Brandon toward the sign that said, "No filming at food stations." Lila stepped forward, voice calm as a level. "Family boundary note applies here. No interviews. Enjoy the park." He hovered, then drifted, ring light dimmer than the morning. At 11, the foundation director visited with a clipboard and a smile that looked earned. "We'd like you to do a quick demo on accuracy you can chew," he said, "then talk 2 minutes on boring systems." I filled a shell to the Sharpie line, weighed a chocolate sliver to the gram, and set a lemon square so the cut faced the light. The brass trio softened, the crowd leaned in, the goose timer honked right on 140 to Kiev and made a toddler clap as if science had waved back. Academic phrase of the day: procedural justice, the public argument that when steps feel fair, transparent, and consistent, people accept outcomes more peacefully, even the ones they didn't request. In bakeries, that means posted temps, labeled pans, prices that match receipts. In families, it looks like boundary notes everyone can read. Quirky fact. Sidebar. In old Paris ovens, bakers would mark each household's bread with a unique score or stamp so loaves could share heat and still find their way home. The mark was called a poinçon, a tiny proof of origin, a way to say mine without raising a voice. We stamped our boxes with a small lemon and a date, our modern poinçon, because paper is a map kindness can follow. Around noon, clouds flirted with the sun, and a breeze lifted our napkins like they had opinions. The day kept being itself, lines, laughter, small decisions that added up to trust. 3 light jokes landed where they should. First, the brass trio launched into an 80s power ballad and no one complained. We plated cream puffs like a slow-motion montage. Second, Victor labeled a tub "mystery frosting, do not trust," and slid it to discards as if he'd saved us from a soap opera. Third, Danny solemnly informed the goose timer that it had good stage presence. The timer honked its thanks on cue. Raina appeared in flats, hair up, a folder under her arm, a familiar silhouette that always lowers my blood pressure. "Cease and desist worked," she murmured. "Anonymous campaign deleted. Foundation council satisfied." And the inspector wrote, "Excellent logs. Also, I brought napkins." I exhaled the way ovens do when they open to a room that won't rush them. Lila handed Raina a lemon square. Raina stared at it like precedent, then ate it like mercy. Near the end of our slot, a young vendor in a flour-dusted tee approached with a worried ledger. "I love baking," she whispered, "but my numbers are louder than my hope." We spread her costs like sheet music. Butter here, labor there, waste hiding under miscellaneous. We circled 3 changes that would let her breathe next week. She cried the good kind, silent, efficient, and bought a single croissant with coins she counted slowly, which felt like a ceremony I wanted to bow for. "Send me your inventory counts tonight," Lila said, unprompted. "We'll make a small plan." My heart did that quiet lift it saves for sentences with a spine. When the last square left the tray and the brass trio packed its cases, the director handed us a modest check and an invitation inked with relief. "Teach the workshop again next month?" "Yes," we said. Because repetition is how goodness makes muscle memory. We loaded racks, took 1 more lap for dropped zip ties, and drove home on streets that had learned our names. Back at the bakery, we put everything where tomorrow could find it. Victor cleaned the pit like a man auditioning for the role of useful, which he has already won. Aunt Miriam adjusted the left oven's new gasket a whisper and declared the heat, truthful. Danny restocked parchment, 39 pound, our Goldilocks, and labeled the bin because future hands deserved not to guess. Lila waited by the cupboard with the simple binder and the wince folder. "I'm ready," she said, and read something I didn't expect. A short formal apology addressed to me and to the shop. 1 paragraph. Dates, verbs, a promise to keep her nouns honest going forward. I signed beneath it like a witness at a small wedding between intention and practice. She hung it inside the cupboard, not for shame, but for memory, where change lives after it stops performing. Evening settled like a cotton blanket, the kind that breathes when the day won't stop glowing. We wrote the next week's plan in pencil because reality edits. We scheduled Danny's raise review. We slotted a repair window for a hinge that squeaked in a key we didn't like. We confirmed Saturday wholesale counts with Moon and Mason and added a clause Miriam suggested, just because it made the paper kinder. Before we locked up, Brandon sent one last text. No link, no lecture. I'll stop. It arrived like a paper boat after a storm, soggy, improbable, but floating. I didn't answer. Lila typed, "Please do," then slid her phone face down, the way you put a lid on simmering. We dimmed the lights one by one. The bowls reflected the exit sign's small moon. The reach-in kept its vow. The timers rested like obedient crickets. I taped a card above the register for the week ahead. Bake the batch, not the rumor. Sleep before deciding. Serve the person in front of you. We locked the door, palm lingering on the glass as if gratitude traveled by conduction. The hinge clicked, small and certain, inside. The room held our day like a gentle palm, outside. The street agreed. Night drifts in like a slow tide over clean sand, and the bakery settles into its softer shapes. The racks empty and honest, the counters cool as lake water before dawn, the reach-in humming its lullaby for whoever needs to borrow a little steadiness. What began as a room where the word failure tried to echo has become a place arranged by proof. The little cards that say temp and time and waste. The boxes stamped with lemons and dates. The ledger corners filled in a green that means solvency rather than spectacle. The clause that insists on sleeping before any signature tries to grow teeth. The city outside keeps its patient breathing, and inside the air tastes faintly of butter and relief, of dough promising tomorrow without asking for applause. People have changed at the exact speed paper allows. A daughter learns to love nouns. A consultant keeps storms small with calmly stapled exhibits. A young hire pipes meringues like punctuation at the end of kind sentences. An ant with a tiny level teaches rooms to sing in tune. And a man who prefers trash rides. And receipts over grand gestures becomes an upgrade to the boring parts where love lives. Even rumor, that restless tenant, finds fewer rooms to rent when every door asks for names and dates and returns a simple, steady no. And in the quiet after the festival, with lemon squares measured to truth and the goose timer asleep at last. The little notes taped where hands already go make a gentle promise that feels as long as a coastline. Bake the batch. Not the noise. Serve the person in front of you. Keep your paper kind. Let the ordinary be enough, and you will sleep.